English identity emerged from the Anglo-Saxon period after the fall of Roman Britain, with the unification of various kingdoms under figures like Alfred the Great in the 9th century. The Norman Conquest in 1066 layered Norman influences onto this Germanic base, shaping the language, governance and culture. Over centuries, events like the Magna Carta 1215 and the English Reformation 16th century and the Industrial Revolution 18th and 19th centuries have fostered a narrative of individualism, parliamentary democracy and innovations as hallmarks of Englishness. Although Englishness and Britishness are used synonymously in some contexts, the two terms are not identical and the relation of each to the other is complex. Englishness is often a response to different national identities within Britain, such as Scottishness, Irishness and Welshness. Our belief in an Anglo-Saxon invasion can be traced to the Venerable Bede. But Bede was attempting to create an English identity in over the countries that we now recognised as England today. Thus being English was equated with Germanic, which Bede was, rather than Celtic or Brythonic identity. Bede, 672, or was it 3, to 26th of March 735, also known as the Venerable Bede, was an English monk, author and scholar. He's one of the best known writers during the early Middle Ages, and his most famous work, Ecclesiastical History of the English People. He served at the monastery of St. Peter and its companion monastery of St. Paul in the kingdom of Northumbria of the Angles. Bede's account of the Anglo-Saxon settlement in Britain is largely drawn from Gildas's De Excedo et Conquestu Britanniae. Bede would also have been familiar with more recent accounts, such as Stephen of Ritten's Life of Wilfrid, and the anonymously written Life of Gregory the Great and Life of Cuthbert. It's from Gildas that we get the concept of late Roman authorities inviting Saxons to England. It's also Gildas who suggests that when St. Augustine arrived in Kent, he found the population to be practicing Jutish paganism. However, there's more evidence to suggest that Britons were still practicing early Christianity, often called Celtic Christianity. Nevertheless, Bede was keen to repeat the Roman Church's interpretation of events. Thus, Bede's primary intention in writing Historica Ecclesiastica was to show the growth of a united church throughout England. The native Britons whose Christian church survived the departure of the Romans earned Bede's ire for refusing to help to convert the Anglo-Saxons. By the end of Historia, the English and the church are dominant over the Britons. This goal of showing the movement towards unity explains Bede's animosity towards the British method of calculating Easter. Much of Historia is devoted to a history of this dispute, including the final resolution at the Synod of Whitby in 664. Although, as indicated, Bede was concerned to show the unity of the English, despite the disparate kingdoms that existed when he was writing. Bede's account of early migration of the Angles and Saxons to England omits any mention of the movement of these people across the English Channel from Britain to Brittany, described by Procopius, who was writing in the 6th century. Compelling though the myth of pagan Anglo-Saxon invasion is, at least of southern and eastern England, there's very little archaeological evidence to support this. Indeed, archaeological evidence is more supportive of a slow integration of Germanic peoples into the Brythonic core. DNA evidence would also seem to support this. Large-scale DNA studies have largely dismantled the idea of mass population replacement. While there was a definite influx of Germanic ancestry, particularly in eastern England, the vast majority of the native British population remained. The native Brythonic lineage remains a dominant part of modern English and British gene pool. The standard narrative is of an economic and population collapse following the end of Roman Britain and leaving a vacuum for Anglo-Saxons to fill. But again, archaeological evidence does not support this. What archaeological evidence does support is a slow evolution from Celtic culture to a more Germanic culture. Nevertheless, even the concept of the Brythonic people being Celtic is now contested. Archaeologists like Dr. Francis Pryor have shown that flourishing indigenous cultures endured and simply adapted. Instead of discovering widespread destruction of burnt down cities dating to the 5th and 6th centuries, evidence points to continuity in agriculture, rural life and trade networks. And native Britons and early Germanic migrants lived alongside each other. Finding artifacts which display a Celtic or Germanic influence does not prove that the people they belong to were either Celtic or Germanic. Just as finding a pair of Levi's in my belongings does not prove that I am American, nor that a pair of Superdry jeans in my son's belongings does not suggest that the English people supplanted Americans in the UK. The process is often attributed to elite dominance and the adoption of a language. As Germanic tribes and their languages gained prestige, native Britons likely adopted the Anglo-Saxon language and culture as a tool for social mobility, economic survival and political favour. A historical analogy is the Americanization of the globe post-World War II. Dramatic cultural and linguistic changes happened in Britain without a literal influx of millions of Americans. The story of the making of England is represented as a battleground between the English and the Vikings, with waves of plunder, conquest and combat. Of the multiple English kingdoms, only one, Wessex, based in the southwest of England, led by Alfred the Great, stopped a great Viking army in its tracks through warfare in the 870s. Arguably, the creation of England was not a simple ethnic conflict between the English and the Vikings, but a power grab by Wessex, clothed in the garb of saving people from foreign oppression. There's also evidence that people living at this time saw events more in terms of regional identities than ethnic binaries. However, the main surviving written sources, such as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, were composed under Wessex's influence and therefore give a one-sided view. Traditionally, history has been shaped by decisive conflicts, but England was forged on the negotiation table more than on the battlefield. In 1282, the death of Llywelyn ap Gruff led to the conquest of the Principality of Wales by King Edward I of England. Since then, the heir apparent of the English monarch has held the title Prince of Wales. The Welsh launched several revolts against English rule, the last significant one being that led by Owain Glyndŵr in the early 15th century. In the 16th century, Henry VIII, himself of Welsh extraction, as great-grandson of Owen Tudor, passed the laws in the Wales Act, aiming to fully incorporate Wales into the Kingdom of England. Wales became a part of the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1707, and then the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in 1801. The term England and Wales became common for describing the area to which English law applied, although more properly it was England, Wales and Monmouthshire, as historically the legal boundary between England and Wales was blurred. Monmouthshire was created from the Welsh lands by Henry VIII in 1536. Its justice and administration were vested in the English court system. The Acts of Union refers to two Acts of Parliament, one by the Parliament of Scotland in March 1707, followed shortly thereafter by an equivalent Act of Parliament in England. They put into effect the International Treaty of Union, agreed on the 22nd of July 1706, which politically joined the Kingdom of England and Kingdom of Scotland into a single political state named Great Britain, with Queen Anne as its sovereign. The English and Scottish Acts of Ratification took effect on the 1st of May 1707, creating the new kingdom, with its parliament based in the Palace of Westminster. The two countries had shared a monarch since the personal union of the crowns in 1603, when James the VI of Scotland inherited the English throne from his cousin Elizabeth I to become James I of England, or also become James I of England. Attempts had been made to try and reunite the two separate countries in 1606, 1667, and in 1689, following the Glorious Revolution in 1688, and subsequent depositions by James II of England, by his daughter Mary and her husband William of Orange. It was not until the early 18th century that both nations, via separate groups of English and Scotch royal commissions and their respective political establishments, came to support the idea of an international treaty of political, monetary and trade union, albeit for different reasons. Ireland, although a kingdom under the same crown, was not included in the union. It remained a separate kingdom represented in Parliament and was legally subordinate to Great Britain until the Reunification Act of 1783. In July 1707, each House of Parliament of Ireland passed a congratulatory address to Queen Anne, praying that may God put in your royal heart to add greater strength and lustre to your crown, by a still more comprehensive union. The British government did not respond to the invitation of an equal union between Great Britain and Ireland, was out of consideration until the 1790s. The Union of Ireland finally came about on the 1st of January 1801. Despite political integration of Scotland and England had been a key policy of Queen Anne from the time she succeeded the throne in 1702. On the aegis of the Queen and her ministers, both kingdoms, the Parliaments of England and Scotland, and the Act of Treaty with the Union 1705, agreed to participate in fresh negotiations for a treaty in 1707. Victorian British identity was anchored in a booming industrial middle class, unwavering Protestant morality and global imperial pride. Driven by strict gender roles and respectability, the era's identity was defined by public-facing confidence in the British Empire, contrasted with deep anxieties over social class and the domestic sphere. Towards the end of the century, a broader, earlier version of inclusive Britishness shifted into a more radicalised, dominant form of Englishness that sometimes marginalised Celtic identities within the UK. 19th century English nationalism developed as much in response to growing interest in Scottish and Welsh national identity, itself in response to its marginalisation. Thus it was part of the Romantic movement, itself a response to the horrors of the Industrial Revolution. With mass social upheaval and inequality resulting from the Industrial Revolution, the first 2 decades of Queen Victoria's reign saw an ongoing debate on the so-called condition of England question. In 3 keynote publications, the Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle, 1829, 1839 and 1843, warned against the deleterious effect of this mechanical age, which had sapped the nation's moral and spiritual vigour. J.S. Milne from the 1840s onwards, in inaugurating a true science of national character based on ethnicity, culture, custom, and political development, would eventually guide the civilization process amongst backward people, such as the Irish, against a backdrop of an interpretation of Britain as England alone, so that British history was essentially English history, writ large, by the late Victorian period. In the Victorian period, the juxtaposition of Saxon and Celt along racial and cultural lines was instrumental in defining national character, and by extension came to foster ideas about people's claims of an authentic and sustainable nationhood. In comparison to be perceived continental despotism and anarchy, it was claimed that Britain enjoyed access to stable institutions and fair parliamentary representation, which was derived from the rudimentary democracy practiced by the Saxon Teutonic tribes who settled England during the Dark Ages. The Anglicisation of British identity was bound up in the legends of King Arthur, who was claimed by the Welsh, or maybe that's another Arthur, and Robin Hood. While King Arthur and his knights are the natural resource of conservatives, elites, and nostalgic romantics, Robin Hood and his merry men appealed to working-class audiences and socialists. The fact that two such dissimilar heroes could be simultaneously national icons reflects the way in which national identities serve and can be made to serve a range of different constituencies. The development of a commitment to the idea of the English as Anglo-Saxons, part of a wider Germanic racial community destined for supremacy. The latter 19th century reinvention of Robin Hood as a Saxon hero, a second Hereward the Wake, valiantly resisting the Norman oppressors, is effectively contrasted with Ivanhoe, of 1820, in which Robin also features. In Scott's novel, the initial antagonism of Norman and Saxon is diffused by the marriage of the Normophile Ivanhoe with the doggedly Saxon Rowena. Such a transformation had been at a cost. Any pretensions to historic accuracy had been jettisoned, and Arthurian interpreters such as Tennyson had made it clear that they were dealing with the legendary, not historical Arthur. Within the context of latter 19th century culture, such a strategy was not unusual. The development of history as an academic discipline placed an increasing strain on the creators of popular representations of the past. Culturally, English identity is often linked to symbols and traditions. The English language, global lingua franca, tea drinking, pub culture, Shakespeare, a dry sense of humour, queuing etiquettes, cream teas, and sports like cricket, football and rugby. Though they are British institutions, the monarchy and the BBC are often tied to English identity, owing to their geographic bases in England. The countryside, with its rolling hills, villages and pubs, also play a big role in the romanticisation, self-image, contrasting with urban centres like London, a global meeting pot. Socially, English identity is tied to values like fair play, politeness, understatement, stoicism, the stiff upper lip, and parliamentary democracy. Events like the last night at the Proms or Guy Fawkes Night also contribute to a shared cultural fabric that are not unique to England. Where English national stereotypes such as industriousness, vigour, discipline and self-sufficiency were seen to have powered both the Industrial Revolution and Britain's imperial mission, racial stereotypes of the Irish as feckless, savage and mercurial were used to explain away outbreaks of political dissent. The British Empire's peak saw English intertwined with imperial pride, but it declined after World War II, prompted a re-evaluation. England's population is diverse, with immigration from former colonies, Europe and beyond, shaping urban centres like London, Manchester and Liverpool. This has led to tensions and discussions about what Englishness means in a globalised multi-ethnic society. Some associate it with rural nostalgia, while others see it as urban, dynamic and cosmopolitan.